Benin's armed forces were given a clear directive. Advance north. Mobilize. Prepare to confront what the government described as a looming threat. But when the order reached the barracks, something unexpected happened. Units did not move. Not one isolated group acting in secrecy, but multiple formations choosing to stand down. In real time, the chain of command showed visible strain. The reaction in Cotonou was immediate anxiety. Officials moved quickly behind closed doors. International partners began making urgent calls. France, long accustomed to quiet influence in West African security affairs, watched the situation with growing concern. And at the center of the regional storm stood Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, a man who had not deployed troops, had not issued threats, had not crossed any border. He did not need to. What crossed into Benin was not an army. It was an idea. Ideas, once embedded inside military institutions, are difficult to uproot. Governments can discipline individuals. They can reshuffle commanders. They can impose curfews and issue statements. But when belief begins to compete with orders, authority becomes fragile. What unfolded in Benin in February 2025 was more than a protest wave and more than a routine dispute over policy. It exposed a deeper fracture in the political architecture of West Africa. For years, many leaders assumed the regional balance would hold. Coastal states would remain aligned with Western security frameworks. Sahel states that broke away would be contained. Public opinion would grumble but remain manageable. That calculation is now under pressure. To understand the tension, one must step back. Since 2021, the Sahel has experienced a sequence of military takeovers. In Mali, then Burkina Faso, then Niger, new authorities rose with a shared message. France must withdraw. Western-led security partnerships have failed. Sovereignty must be reclaimed, even if new partnerships emerge with powers such as Russia. These were not quiet power transfers. They were wrapped in ideological language. Young populations across the region, frustrated by insecurity and economic stagnation, embraced rhetoric of independence. Traore, young and assertive, became the most visible symbol of this shift. Wearing fatigues and invoking Pan-African memory, he positioned himself as a figure of defiance. Whether this posture reflects enduring doctrine or calculated politics remains open to debate. What matters is that the symbolism resonated. In politics, symbolism often travels faster than policy outcomes. When Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger formed the Alliance of Sahel States and withdrew from ECOWAS in early 2024, the rupture became formal. West Africa appeared divided into two broad camps. On one side, coastal states such as Benin, Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, and Senegal, largely aligned with Western frameworks. On the other, landlocked Sahel governments asserting a new independent bloc. Benin faced a strategic dilemma. How should it respond to neighbors who openly rejected the regional order Benin remained part of? The answer, according to emerging reports, leaned toward containment. Burkina Faso is landlocked. Its economy depends on access to coastal corridors. Trade routes through neighboring states sustain supply chains and market access. Applying pressure along Benin's northern corridor could, in theory, strain Ouagadougou's logistics and increase internal pressure on Traoré's administration. On paper, the logic had structure. In practice, it collided with public sentiment. Protests in Cotonou began to swell. Citizens questioned whether their country was being positioned as a staging ground in a broader geopolitical contest. Allegations that French advisors were involved in border planning intensified anger. For many, this confirmed long-standing suspicions that sovereignty was conditional. The language of protest followed a pattern seen elsewhere in West Africa. Russian flags appeared. Images of Sahel leaders circulated. Anti-French chants echoed in the streets. What made this moment distinct was location. This was not Bamako or Ouagadougou. This was a coastal state previously considered stable within the Western-aligned camp. Symbols from the Sahel were now visible on Beninese soil. That development alone signaled ideological spillover. Analysts now debate whether the alignment reflects genuine admiration for the Sahel bloc or whether it is primarily domestic frustration borrowing available imagery. The likely answer includes both. Domestic grievance gives energy. External symbols give shape. Meanwhile, inside the military, hesitation carried profound implications. Armies rarely defy orders casually. Refusal suggests conflict between directive and identity. Reports indicated some soldiers cited ethnic and historical ties with communities across the Burkina Faso border. West African frontiers were drawn during colonial rule, often cutting through shared cultural networks. Family, language, and trade-linked communities across modern boundaries. For a soldier from northern Benin, being asked to posture against a neighboring state presenting itself as defender of Pan-African dignity may generate internal conflict. Contracts bind soldiers to the state. Identity binds them to history. When those forces collide, discipline weakens. For France, the implications are serious. Its influence in the region historically combined formal defense agreements with embedded advisory roles. If those advisory presences become focal points of resentment, the framework itself becomes unstable. For ECOWAS, the episode complicates cohesion. The bloc already lost 3 members to the Sahel Alliance. An internal crisis in a remaining member state undermines credibility and strategic clarity. Togo presents an instructive contrast. Rather than openly pressuring Burkina Faso, it has positioned itself pragmatically. The port of Lomé has gained importance as Ouagadougou diversifies supply routes. Economic calculation has replaced ideological confrontation. As Benin faces unrest, Togo's trade volumes reportedly rise. Geography creates leverage. Strategy determines how it is used. For Burkina Faso, events in Benin relieve pressure indirectly. Traore does not need to escalate rhetoric. Instability next door shifts focus away from Ouagadougou's internal challenges. Symbolic influence operates without troop movement. This raises a broader question. Is the Sahel transformation a durable political shift or a legitimacy crisis framed as revolution? Both interpretations contain truth. Public grievances are real. Decades of external military presence did not eliminate insurgency. Economic arrangements did not produce inclusive growth. Yet the new governments face severe humanitarian and security strains of their own. Violence persists. Displacement remains high. Promises of sovereignty have not yet translated into measurable stability. The gap between failed past and uncertain future is volatile territory. In that space, symbolism often outruns results. Benin now sits at the edge of this volatility. If coastal states can contain ideological spillover, the regional divide may hold. If not, the political map grows more complex. Benin's government now faces a narrow set of choices, none without risk. One option is force. Reassert control. Deploy loyal security units. Restrict demonstrations. Frame the unrest as foreign manipulation. This approach promises short-term order. Yet across the Sahel, heavy-handed crackdowns have often accelerated instability rather than prevented it. When public trust is already thin, coercion deepens suspicion. A second option is retreat. Distance the state from foreign advisors. Pause or reverse the northern border posture. Signal openness to dialogue with Burkina Faso and the broader Sahel bloc. This might cool tensions in the streets. It might reduce friction inside the armed forces. But retreat carries reputational cost. It can appear as capitulation under pressure. Governments that bend too quickly risk encouraging further demands. There is a third path, more difficult but potentially stabilizing. Transparent accounting. Publicly clarify what the border strategy was, who advised it, and why it was pursued. Admit miscalculations if they occurred. Announce verifiable adjustments. This route addresses the deeper issue of legitimacy, rather than only its symptoms. Yet transparency under crisis requires political courage that many administrations struggle to summon. Beyond immediate tactics lies a generational undercurrent shaping the entire region. West Africa's demographic profile is young. Large segments of the population are under 35. This generation grew up amid insurgency headlines, limited economic mobility, and constant exposure to digital political narratives. They compare promises to outcomes in real time. They consume speeches, counter-speeches, and alternative viewpoints across social media platforms that bypass traditional gatekeepers. For many of them, the appeal of Sahel leaders is not rooted in policy detail. It rests in posture. Visible defiance toward former colonial influence resonates emotionally. The symbolism carries weight even when material conditions remain difficult. Perception now competes with performance. Objectively, the Sahel governments confront serious constraints. Insurgent groups still operate. Humanitarian needs remain high. International isolation restricts financial flexibility. Yet symbolic momentum persists. In political psychology, perceived courage can outweigh measurable results, at least in the short term. Benin's leadership may have underestimated this dynamic. Officials likely assessed the northern border plan as a rational security maneuver. Many citizens interpreted it through an ideological lens shaped by years of regional upheaval. Once reports of French involvement surfaced, the narrative hardened. In environments where suspicion of external influence is already high, opacity fuels outrage. When governments operate between denial and partial disclosure, revelations land harder. The military dimension remains the most sensitive variable. A state can manage protests with negotiation or containment. Managing doubt within the armed forces is more complex. Armies are hierarchical institutions built on obedience. When units hesitate, commanders must ask why. If hesitation stems from logistical confusion, it can be corrected. If it stems from identity conflict or ideological sympathy, the challenge runs deeper. Rebuilding cohesion requires restoring belief that orders align with national interest, not external agendas. Regional implications extend beyond Benin. If ideological currents from the Sahel penetrate coastal military institutions, the clear two-camp model of West African politics dissolves. Instead of a clean geographic divide, states face internal pluralism. Governments may remain aligned with Western frameworks while segments of their populations and institutions gravitate toward alternative visions. This creates strategic uncertainty for external actors. France's long-standing method relied on stable partnerships with coastal states. If domestic opinion turns sharply against visible French involvement, policymakers in Paris confront a dilemma: reduce footprint and risk losing influence, or maintain presence and risk intensifying backlash. ECOWAS also confronts institutional strain. Already weakened by the departure of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, the bloc must preserve unity among remaining members. An internal crisis in Benin complicates collective messaging and decision-making. Togo's approach illustrates an alternative model. By emphasizing trade corridors and pragmatic engagement, it has avoided becoming the focal point of ideological confrontation. Economic interdependence can temper political polarization. Yet even pragmatic strategies operate within the same ideological climate. No state is insulated indefinitely. For Burkina Faso, developments in Benin validate the power of narrative. Traoré's administration has not achieved decisive security victories. Yet its image as a symbol of resistance continues to shape regional discourse. When neighboring states experience unrest partly inspired by that symbolism, influence expands without deployment. History warns that revolutionary energy can fade if unmet by results. Enthusiasm sustained by rhetoric alone may eventually confront material reality. If security conditions fail to improve, public patience can erode. The Sahel bloc remains in early formation. Its durability is not guaranteed. Still, the present moment carries significance. Benin represents a test case for whether coastal states can absorb ideological pressure without structural transformation. If the government restores stability and rebuilds trust, the episode may remain contained. If fractures widen, the region enters a new phase. That phase would not resemble a simple shift from one alliance system to another. It would involve layered loyalties, contested narratives, and institutions pulled in competing directions. At its core, the crisis poses a fundamental question. Who do state institutions serve? Citizens increasingly demand alignment between official policy and perceived national interest. When gaps widen, confidence declines. The soldiers who declined to advance north did not issue manifestos. Their action was minimal yet consequential. Refusal in silence carries symbolic force. It signals that authority is no longer automatic. West Africa stands at a crossroads shaped by history, identity, and generational expectation. Benin's current turbulence may subside, or it may foreshadow broader recalibration. What remains clear is this. Regional politics can no longer be understood solely through formal treaties and diplomatic communiques. Public sentiment, symbolic leadership, and institutional loyalty now interact in ways that redefine stability. The answer to the question raised in Benin will ripple outward. If institutions realign with public trust, the region stabilizes under revised terms. If distrust deepens, the transformation underway in the Sahel will not stop at existing borders. The silent pause of soldiers in northern barracks may mark the beginning of a wider negotiation over sovereignty, influence, and legitimacy across West Africa.